introduce themselves briefly, and then I'm going to start posing some questions. But obviously, this panel is intended to address using a bit of the crypto mental model, layer 0. And what does that mean? What's the role of education? And in this modern era, how can we leverage startup societies to make the educational layer be fundamentally a value add as opposed to the opposite to our vision? But with that, we'll just give a few seconds to each of you to quickly introduce yourselves.
Hi, everyone. Ray Girn, founder and CEO of an organization called Higher Ground Education. We're the largest Montessori school network in the world. And I started out as a teacher and have been in education for the last 20 years, really thinking at a systems level about how to transform pedagogy and then how to implement that in schools.
I'm Michael Strong. I've been in alternative education for 35 years. I'm founder of Socratic Experience, a virtual school, and I'm also founder of the Adolescent Flourishing Initiative at the University of Austin. And I am very passionate about liberating kids so that they can become empowered learners.
Speak a little bit into it.
Hey, I'm Zelda, education hacker. I previously ran a school for young entrepreneurs. I'm a book author, Hacker Education, and I currently run a school in Senegal, Western Africa, to support the next generation of young African entrepreneurs.
I am Matt. I worked with Ray for 8 years to build Higher Ground Education. Right now I'm writing a book on the philosophy of education. Prior to being in education, I was a philosopher. I was a philosophy professor, a philosophy PhD. That's kind of who I am at heart. And I have 2 very small children and think about education all the time. And I don't know, none of us are tech people. Like, I mean, I grew up on the internet. I'm that kind of person.
Great. So education obviously is the common thread here. And startup societies aside, crypto aside, there's quite a bit going on in the world with regards to formal, traditional models of education, and then something new and different that we hope is better. Who would like to comment a bit on where do you see that line dividing the traditional formal educational models as most people think about them, and then the world of the future as you think it should be, so as to unleash maximum potential in our youth for future generations?
Well, I'll hop in. So first of all, one of the great ironies is education should be free for anybody with an internet connection. You can learn anything online. AI bots are making it easier to learn anything for free. So the question is, why isn't everybody already learning for free? Why aren't there a billion Africans, billion Indians, and so forth learning for free? A lot of complications of that, but part of it is the top-down model makes us passive and dependent. And if we raise young people to be independent autonomous agents, and we get rid of government systems of credentialing, occupational licensing, and all of the barriers that governments typically put in, we can flip things around and help billions of young people have great educations at lower cost, in which they have a lot more agency and can do great things.
Okay. I mean, so traditional education, it's not a pedagogy, it's not a law or a set of schools. It like really is a system, and it's not a system that anyone wanted to make. It's not like this was a planned system where, like, people 100 years ago were like, we're going to have, Tayloristic bureaucracies like in charge of our children, and the only year that will really matter in school is your senior year of high school, and then like everybody will go to college, but the value of college will be diluted. I mean, all these problems in education, the pedagogy will be terrible, nobody will learn anything. All these problems are downstream of other fundamentals and the result of other kinds of complex systems working around these systems. I think the thing that separates fundamentally like really better approaches to education is the decision to exit that system and to be first principles in some way. And I have opinions about what those principles are. I largely agree with what Michael Strong just said about agency and activity being really core and really important. But I think if you are raising children or thinking about raising children or thinking about society in which we can raise children better, I don't think you start with iterating on the current model. I think you exit it and then start building.
I think you learn a lot about a society when you look at the way it teaches students and the way it treats, in general, students. And we can definitely do a better job at that. I think that for example, when you see that people being tested and measured by, how good they are at writing down a piece of paper, is something that informs us, right, about what we value in humans, and therefore, definitely agree with you too on the fact that we can do way better.
Yeah, I agree with everything there. I think what I would add is it's early innings right now. If we're talking about, if you take a few different examples, like if you take the issue of the role of the parent in education, and since the beginning of time, it has been the state, the church, the philosopher king, governing education. Jefferson wanted the University of Virginia because an informed population requires concession to there's a central function for education. And the whole idea that Matt mentioned this morning of education as delegated parenting, the same way you hire an attorney and you delegate your interests and he works for you, he's your agent, she's your agent. In that same way, when you partner with a school, when you bring on a teacher, they're your agent as a parent. And that's the Copernican revolution that's happening now. I think for the first time, that's kind of what's being debated. And that's a big change, right? And so that's at the level of the kind of broader, sociocultural systems. And then at the level of pedagogy and learning science, my view is that there is a false alternative embedded into the history of education, where those that understand the centrality of knowledge in human life do not really appreciate that you can't connect the dots in other than your mind, that we're all self-created. And those that really get that, there has to be, agency, that, people are authors of their own future, people are in charge of their own lives, and that has cognitive implications. They end up doing some kind of kumbaya, anything goes. There's no kind of inner strength replacing the carrots and sticks, and so you get this false alternative between the project-based learning and progressive education on the one hand, traditional classical education on the other. And I think that for the first time in human history, because of knowledge of pedagogy, people like Montessori and others, because of 30, 40 years of early education research, because of technology, EdTech finally being ready for prime time, we can solve that issue, and we can solve it all the way through, even at the conceptual level. So it's a very exciting time for systems change.
Just for one more piece, I want to really push on Matt's thing. People are willing to accept the system. I think for some of us, the system is simply ridiculous. It's not even a joke. And I think, Maria Montessori, we should have feature-length film, huge appreciation for Montessori. More recently, I'm seeing lots of tech entrepreneurs and agile software developers creating alternative systems. Primda, Alpha, Acton, Primer, these are a bunch of things all created by tech entrepreneurs, and it's people that go out and do things, see how ridiculous it is. A couple of examples. My son in 4th grade, he was in public schools, we realized it was ridiculous. Came home, he read Larry Gonick's Cartoon History of the Universe in 3 days. How would have any of you look at a 4th grade textbook and compare it to Larry Gonick, Cartoon History of the Universe? Order of magnitude better history. Deeper, richer, more thorough, more sophisticated, more interesting. Different example. We've got kids in my school doing Harvard CS50, Harvard's Introduction to Computer Science, in 6th, 7th, 8th grade. Bright, motivated kids can do way, way more than they're allowed in the system. And once you see that, it's why do you keep them in the regular system? Exit already.
Michael, that's a great segue to the next point I wanted to highlight to some extent, because on the conference, whether it's through biohacking or longevity, or even crypto or finance, a lot has been focused on how startup societies, whether it's Prospera, if you want to think about it as layer 1, or Vitalia as layer 2, it's almost very centric on how what we're doing can empower adults to do more, to do better, to do different. But not much has been said about how what we're doing can empower kids, right? And what opportunities open up, and what could the future of those kids today look like as a result of what we're doing here together in this movement. Could you comment a bit on what you would perhaps be most excited about or want to make sure emphasis goes towards that this movement can allow to empower kids of the future? And what does that look like?
Sure. So, yeah, I want to come back to adults as well, but I think that we have to get education right. And so, this is a kind of like, I agree with the spirit. I agree with what Michael saying. There's a lot of great entrepreneurs, but it's at the edges. Like, we have not, like, if you think about trying to transform the taxi cab industry and you have a bunch of, kind of policymakers get together and you don't have Uber and you don't have Lyft, you're not going to get anywhere. And what we need is some of these organizations that are amazing, but they're small, to really reach a certain level of scale and to really be able to show the world at that level of scale that this works and you've solved the problems of building those systems of scale. And then I think it's going to happen very fast, right? And I think that's part of the challenge is like the actual operational challenge of figuring it out and how to get education right. And then you have to think about issues like, are there pathologies of motivation, or can you really just let your kids do whatever they want, right? Like, what does that mean, right? And if there are pathologies of motivation, how do you solve for that in a way that's not just imposing your adult view, but still honoring the real interest of the child? And then how do you do that when you have a lot of different ability levels and age levels and backgrounds? And that's the work that we're all doing, trying to figure that out and trying to turn it into a system. And that's why I think Montessori is so important to this movement, because if you look at the 0 to 6 ages in particular, you could find someone reasonably intelligent, hardworking, that loves kids, and if you have the right materials, you can create a world-class Montessori environment, and you could do it over and over and over and over again, and that is what we need to accomplish in K-12.
I would agree emphatically. In particular, Montessori was an absolute genius at this whole issue, and people who haven't gone deep into the guts as Ray, Matt, and anybody else. But I would say, going back to the motivation, if a kid is 10 years old and they're confident, motivated, have a sense of purpose, in a sense, they're done. Obviously, they need to do more, but I would rather have a kid who is confident, motivated, and has a sense of purpose at 10 than a kid who is straight A's, passive, and doing as they're told. Fundamental difference. And then going back to what does the future look like with kids like this? A couple of kind of rock star stories and then a broader thing. So Laura Deming was, when she was 6, her dad said, she asked her dad, should I go to school? And he said, well, you can if you want, but I wouldn't if I were you. And he was an entrepreneur, libertarian. And so she didn't. She stayed home, did 2 hours of math, 2 hours of reading, 2 hours of piano, and spent afternoons talking with dad. At 12, she wrote a world-class anti-aging researcher and managed to get an internship in her lab. At 14, she went to MIT, never having taken a conventional course at all. She did a few college science courses, but other than that, her transcript was just things I read. 16, she drops out of MIT to accept a Thiel Fellowship, and now in her 20s, she's one of the leading anti-aging VCs in San Francisco. So yeah, Laura could focus on math 2 hours a day when she was young, but I think much more extraordinary performance could be more common. Different case. Mr. Beast hated school. At 12, he started optimizing for YouTube and, still went through the motions, but Mr. Beast is now worth more than $1 billion, more than an order of magnitude more followers than the New York Times. And hello, maybe some kids should be optimizing for social media than going through conventional school. One more big picture thing, and very big, and I've written a lot about this. I think the anxiety, depression, and suicide rates in the West, in the United States in particular, are catastrophic. Yes, social media is in part causing those, but I think schooling, trad schooling, is the fundamental source. We are cutting down the child's ability to be a flourishing, happy, purpose-driven person, and as consequently get substance abuse, we get anxiety, depression, suicide. So in terms of the outcomes, I think the conventional schooling is causing catastrophic public health outcomes that almost nobody realizes, and the startup societies will have next generation of much healthier kids.
When we think about, so if we think about teenagers, I think that my story is a good example. I'm a high school dropout. I dropped out for my last year of high school doing a little experiment. So I joined an EdTech company while I was studying my curriculum and then obtained my final high school exam and proved that teenagers, when given the chance, can do so much more, like having a full-time job in a startup and also still studying the things from high school and be very successful. And I ended up at 18 years old, a book published author. And so I think what I learned from my story is that the entrepreneur skill set really is just the skill set of what you would want to see in an awesome adult, fulfilled, that is someone who takes initiatives, that is someone who's seeking to grow, who doesn't stay unhappy with their problems. This is really what I would envision for the future of education. That is not the future of schooling. I think that to learn how to be an entrepreneur, we don't go to school. We need to imagine different structures. That would be my thought on that.
What was the question again? What's possible with children?
Right, and also in the context of startup societies, how is what we're doing enabling or can enable a better context for kids to learn and be educated in, so that in the future we have maximum prosperity?
So children don't really do stuff anymore. I mean, I'm gonna kind of old man get off my lawn tone of voice for a second, but if you think about what Michael just said, what Ray and Zelda were both alluding to, what's possible to a child, what we know is possible to a child cross-culturally or from historical contexts, children are, Montessori called the child a forgotten citizen, and a lot has changed in her day. I don't think it's like true in exactly the same way that she said it, but children are not part of normal life in most places. In the US, in the West, there are some exceptions, but children don't even play independently with each other as much anymore, much less kind of do projects together. So I mean, the opportunity with a social experiment, like a startup city, is that part of what you do, like in addition to education reform, kind of schooling reform, or whatever you do that's formal, you kind of get together and you say, here's our vision for what's possible for childhood. Here's what children can do, like on the weekends or in between spaces or on their own. And like, here's what's actually safe. We're rethinking risk, we're rethinking safety. And to just have, I mean, whatever you think the most idyllic approach is to childhood, you can have that. Like it has existed relatively recently, even though we've lost so much of it now. So here's what I'm talking about, the whole free range parenting movement and kids playing independently with one another and what kids are allowed to do in terms of working a job and making money. Like all of this is up for grabs, and they're big difference makers in childhood. I also just ask, how many people here have kids? You are a kid, yeah. I mean, I think this isn't quite the question that you asked, but solving this problem will 10x the number of people in this room. I mean, for a lot of you aren't thinking about kids, or like if you are, it's like in the future, it's not that active. There's a people who have kids in this room are in a minority. Once you move to thinking about like a society like in a more generational way, or having a slightly older group of people, kids become children. How you treat and educate and raise children becomes very central for everybody that does it. It automatically, like you do it, you have a kid, and all of a sudden, like it's one of your top values. It's right up there with like your marriage and your work and whatever else listed as a top value. And so it is very much a layer zero thing.
So it sounds like it's more than just classroom or what is taught in a formal way, but actually how children more generally in that society, and how we said risks, we said child labor laws,
Yeah.
everything, so that children are no longer sort of off there doing worksheet from 9 to 3, but rather are more integrated in conferences and
Totally.
events, etc.
And I mean, you could think of that as part of education, even though it falls outside of the scope of school. And it's part of what it's very important to development. If I had, I work in education and schooling, and that's what I've spent the last 10 years doing. If I had a choice between totally fixing the outside of school childhood culture and parenting culture, and totally fixing schools, I genuinely don't know which one I would pick. They're both very important.
I'm going to give a shocking example of what Matt's talking about. How old are you? 9. Okay. My favorite example of what kids are capable of are the Abernathy brothers. The Abernathy brothers were 2 brothers aged 10 and 6 that in 1910 rode by horseback from Oklahoma to New York alone without supervision. So I'm going to stand up so people can see what a 9-year-old looks like. Imagine him taking off with the little brother to go from Oklahoma to New York. Crazy, crazy dad, but the dad had been a cowboy who at age 11 was riding cow herds from Texas to Kansas. And it turns out cowboy are called cowboys because most of them were boys. It used to be normal at 12, 13 and so forth to do things that, now 30-year-olds are playing video games in the basement.
Yeah. What kind of emphasis, place a lot of emphasis on this point. The impact that the perspective on the parent, the emerging parent, can have on how a movement like the Startup Cities movement kind of evolves. Part of the work that we're doing is trying to win hearts and minds, right? Try to show people the value of doing living in a different way. And if you're trying to win hearts and minds at a systems level, probably the only time in adult life where you're willing to reconsider everything is when you have your first child, the 6 months before and after. An individual would get into a car accident and you have an epiphany and you're like, God, is this really what I want to do? But across, at a systems level, across people, if you want to change the world in some way, you have to recognize that fact. And then, so that's point number 1. Point number 2, there is a total structural divide between K-12 and early education. You can look at public schools and don't talk to Head Start programs. You can look at private schools, you can look at the US, anywhere. They're 2 different ecosystems. And there's an opportunity to transcend that false alternative, that false dichotomy. And that is an opportunity we have to think about. If we did that, like, we're creating greater value. And then I think that the kind of third point is, there is nothing like your kids playing together if you're trying to build a movement. And in terms of people being invested in something over time, movements and communities, I think, do end up centering. People change their communities when they become parents, and so you have to think about how to achieve that. Now, I have an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 3-year-old, and I started an organization that opens schools with my wife. My kids are here. They're at the school 2 minutes from here, because when I travel for a week, I can bring them with me here. I can bring them to Portland. I can bring them to New York. I can bring them to Paris. We're living that life. It's possible and it's seamless. We have other executives here. They take their kids with them. They're here as well. And so, imagine creating a product that allows for this, that is actually a better education for the child and actually optimizes the needs of the modern family, which are different. That I think is pretty core to the winning formula, and then especially if part of what you're trying to do is help people adopt a new philosophical framework to meet them when they are. Because, to Michael's point about how crazy the system is, my lower middle class immigrant parents, if you said school is about finding agency, they would have rolled their eyes. School is about getting a job, improving your station in life, and so part of what we have to do is show them that even on that premise, what you're doing there is not going to work here. That's not the way to work.
Great. All right, I wanted to create an opportunity for questions from the audience, and the way I would like to do it is I'd like to see if there's 3 questions. The 3 questions will be raised, and then the panel can answer whichever questions you want, real quick. So, you go first.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a specific question for, all of you, but Michael in particular. I've been following you for a while on Twitter and LinkedIn, and I think it was you who shared a graph suicide rates, and they jump up on children's suicide rates. They jump up right when term starts again. And I remember I had a bad time in school, and I remember that I never suicidal, luckily. I remember that I wanted to go to boarding school, and I wonder whether you think boarding schools could be a solution to that. Concretely, I think what we can do in Prospera right now, we can't bring Prospera to the kids of the world, but we can bring some kids who are struggling elsewhere in the world to Prospera. We can start, for example, a boarding school and do that economically, because in most cases it's quite expensive. Do that economically by using AI tutors and whatever. To be able to make that available to kids who otherwise, whose parents wouldn't be able to pay that.
All right, that's one question. There's another question over there, and the third one over here. Question, who has a question over there? Don't forget, Mike, that was for you.
I just wanted to ask, because you mentioned it before, why hasn't it rolled out to the whole world if we would have the access to it? And I feel like there's a little forgiveness. We can be expanding on that.
Okay. It's like a question, is a third question.
I'd just love to hear your thoughts on the role of startup societies and technology in promoting gifted education.
Okay.
Great questions, 4 panelists.
So just quickly, for people who don't know, there's really solid evidence that teen suicides increase during the school year. They dip in the summer, they dip over the holidays, and that pattern stops at graduation. And it's substantial, such that Mondays during certain months of the school year, it's about double the rate of July. So I consider conventional schooling a very serious public health hazard. But I'm all in terms of, I might speak about this a lot, Paul, if you'd like, but I'm very into let's create a boarding school here. And Ray and Matt already have school here, so maybe we can talk about the boarding aspect. Just quickly on the, why is it all free? So a lot of this is, I actually hired Zelda because she had so much initiative. On Twitter, I thought, hey, if somebody drops out of school, writes a book, and then starts an entrepreneurial incubator and so forth, at 18 or whatever, that's the kind of person we want. So I'm interested in how do we develop this entrepreneurial can-do autodidactic avenue. I think part of it is Montessori and or similar agency-based K6. So it's not like every 3-year-old's going to do this, but at one point, I created a Montessori middle school in Palo Alto. Half the kids came from Montessori, half the kids from outside. The Montessori kids were basically autodidacts at 6th grade. The outside kids, no matter how smart, well-behaved, whatever their parents were passive and dependent. It took a semester or a year to kind of give them agency. So my whole project is how do we prepare young people so that when they're 10, 11, 12, 13, maybe some not till 16, where they can basically be free. And if you want to take academic courses, but a choice rather than in any sense a necessary obligation.
I wanted to comment on your question. I think that boarding school is one solution for unhappy teenagers who are looking for something else. But the way I prefer to frame it is, what do teenagers want to do? That is, I think that the biggest problem with our current school system, public school system, for teenagers especially, is the lack of power they have to take initiatives and to make use of their agency. And so, of course, building a boarding school is amazing. And do you send your teen there without asking for their opinion, or do they want to go and do you listen to the other ideas that they have? And I think this is really the shift in terms of culture that we want to see happen in education. Take children seriously, take their opinions seriously. And by the way, if you want to learn more about this, Taking Children Seriously is a school of thought co-founded by David Deutsch. I know that many people here really enjoy his work. And the entire idea of taking children seriously is how do we stop coercing children? How do we let children be free? And I dream of a society that looks like that, to be honest. I dream of a society, I hope that one of them will be right here in Prospera, where children are free to learn how they want and what they want.
What was the third question? Oh, gifted education. Okay, I'll say something about that in a second. On the why is it making everything free on the internet sufficient? So agency is rate limited by competence. Like that something is out there doesn't mean that you can do it, or that you're free to do something doesn't mean that you can do it. I literally believe that for most topics that you would want to consider foundational that a child would learn in school, like basic science, basic history, basic literature, a kind of good, age-appropriate, highly motivated, contextualized, pedagogically sound introduction to that topic that a child could follow or be excited by either doesn't exist or exists, but it's like discovering it is like very non-trivial. Like the child's probably not going to be able to find it, and the parents probably not going to be able to find it. There's an on-ramping to knowledge. I and probably many people in this room can learn a lot about anything from the internet. We're kind of generally epistemically competent people. No 8-year-old is going to be generally epistemically competent, or it will be very rare. And so the question is kind of like, how do you get from here to there, and what does it take? And it's not. I think part of it is like, how do you have higher agency individuals in general? But there's more to it than that. There's like, how do you? Like, imagine you didn't speak English. Imagine you only spoke, what's a really obscure language? Like Croatian, I don't know. The internet would not be that useful to you. It would be 100 times more useful to you if you spoke English. Like, children don't speak internet. And so think about that and you can think about that for the public library too. It's not internet specific. Like if you just held a school in a great library, that doesn't solve the knowledge problem. They couldn't understand most of the books. Children don't speak that language yet. And so there's a whole process by which you become epistemically competent, and I don't think that that's something that education solves well for. So this is related to the gifted student question. There are some students, and there always will be. Let me start over with the gifted student question. Great people, exceptional people, make themselves great out of mediocre inputs. And that's part of what greatness is the capacity to turn yourself into something great out of really mediocre input. You have Frederick Douglass, who from almost nothing, from the most minimal aspects of education, turns himself into Frederick Douglass. And most people with a tremendous amount of love and support couldn't turn themselves into Frederick Douglass, right? So
Can I inject something you're thinking and perhaps invite others to comment as well? What about IQ? Are you talking about IQ or are you talking about something else? To what extent does the educational model add significant output capacity, exceptionalism to individuals? Is it genetics or is it environment? Like, can you comment on the IQ in particular?
So I'll be talking on Tuesday. I'm giving a talk in the what is it called, the Beach Falls, on kind of what I think a kind of normal versus exceptional standard is in education. It's very important to talk. So I'll be talking about this much more. I'm an IQ realist. Do you guys know Brian Kaplan's work? Like, there's a line that Brian Kaplan said where he's like, I'm an IQ realist, but every time I say this, I feel like I'm associating myself with racists and murderers. That's kind of how I feel about it. I think IQ is real. It's an ingredient in being exceptional, but it's not the whole story. I think you have people that are, average or above average intelligence who glom onto a problem for their entire lives and are very high agency about it and reject everything that everybody says, and they kind of somehow form the right premises about it, and that powers them to great discoveries or great achievements. I think we can create more high agency people. I think we can do more with people's intelligence, but when you have an exceptional person like that, in general, school and education is bad for them. It either doesn't help or it makes things worse. And I think a kind of bare minimum case for education should be, it doesn't make high agency people lower agency, and it doesn't make smart people dumb. And that, I don't think our education system is anywhere close to meeting that bar right now. So.
There's an H.G. Wells quote, wealth, privilege, notoriety, power, no measures of success whatsoever. The only true measure of success is the ratio between what you could have made out of your life on the one hand and what you actually made of your life on the other. And that is what the assessment framework that we're trying to create has to assess. Like, fully lived lives, fully experienced lives, and there's ways to measure that. It's not obvious, but it's achievable. And then you can actually judge an education system. Is it helping people make the most of their lives? Because, I mean, I hope you do all come to the talk that Matt is doing on Tuesday, because I mean, it's the best thing I've ever seen on the side. But you have to have a view of what is the good life for an adult. Like, you can't even talk about education unless you have a view of what is the nature of the good life. What does it mean to be a flourishing adult? One, and then two, which is I think unique to us, is 0 to 6 matters. Early education matters a lot. Like, we're talking about teenagers. I regard teenagers as adults. Like, by the time, and we're talking about boarding school, like Montessori says, boarding school is for middle school, because you're on the other end of it, you're done, right? And now it's up to you, and you go on and you choose. And some people don't choose school. Like, you really, I mean, we've extended childhood in part because we idolize and we romanticize the naivety of childhood. When childhood, what makes childhood special? Aspiring to be an adult, growing up, right? And the best type of life is that wonder of childhood combined with the competence and the mastery and the efficacy of adulthood. And so a lot of the work in education is the work of philosophy of saying, what does the human adult look like? The successful, the fulfilled, the good adult. And so that's my pitch for It's on Tuesday.
So just I want to kind of lean into the whole motivation issue. Motivation, I'm happy, motivated to do my homework. Different ways. All excellence, all really true, amazing performance tends to be deliberate practice. You set goals, you rigorously work to achieve those goals. And if that's what it takes to be excellent, K-12 schooling is a disaster. 75% of high school students are unhappy. 2/3 are not even engaged in learning. So anytime anybody looks at research and education, I think basically you've got all these people tuned out like Beavis and Butthead, and you're trying to say, oh, what are the outcomes? It's that bad. It's sort of like the Soviet Union's IT capacities in 1985. Steve Jobs is creating something better than the entire Soviet Union, was the world's best mathematicians. One other kind of anecdote of what can be done, Laszlo Polgar was a Hungarian guy who believed he could create geniuses. He actually believed this before he got married. He searched for a wife who was on board with him in terms of, let's create geniuses. And then it turns out he decided to make his daughters into world-class chess players. All 3 of his daughters were top-ranked chess players. Susan, one of them, is the world's greatest female chess player ever. And so it's really interesting that in advance, he said, we're going to do this project. And his wife said, everything he said has come true.
Fantastic. Okay, we've run out of time for this very interesting topic. However, Ray, you mentioned a talk on Tuesday. Can you give the specifics real quick?
Yeah, so tomorrow we have a school 2 minutes from here. We have an open house. Anyone who's a parent or just wants to learn, you can find me or anyone here with Higher Ground. And then on Tuesday at the lower level here at the beach house at 3 p.m., we're going to have a talk. It's a new normal.
Rethinking moral standards for children.
Rethinking moral standards for children. And we're just going to paint a picture of what's possible in education. And we have 10,000 students across the country getting the type of education we think makes this possible. So it's real. We'd love to share.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much.